Hello, my name is Hasson. I'm a professor in psychology and neuroscience in Princeton University, and I'm very happy to be here. Although I'm alone in my room recording this talk, I hope someone listens, and I hope to meet you all in the panel. By looking at this like a program and this like amazing list of speakers, I cannot be more excited. Then you see all these like wonderful people, some to work with me, some I interacted for many years, and some I really admire the work. And see how people start to use natural stimuli more and more. I decided to give slightly a different talk. It will be like a slightly more personal, and I will try to use some narrative tools in order to explain where we are going. After working with natural stimuli for over 20 years, I really feel that it's going to change the way we think about psychology and neuroscience. I really think that all of you now working in the front line of something really big that's going to change the field. And I'm going to use this like 1 hour talk in order to present you our thoughts and theory in this current moment, based on the background and all the way we walk to get to this moment. So let's start. I want to start with the most important slide, and this is the slide of the people that really did the work. This talk is going to be divided into 3 parts. The first part is based on a paper that was published in NIMH for a special issue about natural stimuli that Tamara edited. And basically, I want to mention over here Sam and Ariel, who really was instrumental to this theoretical paper. The second part going to be based on another theoretical paper. And again, it was done with Sam and Ariel. And the last part actually going to be a new empirical results, unpublished, currently under review. Over there, as you can see, there is a big team of people that really contributed. I really want to mention Ariel. Ariel was the leading power for this project, but we have also many other people in the lab. We also have many people in NYU Epileptic Center that were instrumental to this work. I really want to mention Sasha and Nadine and Ori. And we have also a team of wonderful people in Google Research that also help us with the study, and I want to mention their name as well, as you can see over here. And lastly, I want to thank all the funding that supported our work throughout the years. So let's start with part 1. I started my career not with natural stimuli. I started probably like most of you, maybe some of you still, working with highly controlled stimuli. And I studied face perception. I was a vision scientist and I did my Ph.D. under the supervision of wonderful Rafi Malach, trying to recognize faces. And I started each of my talk back in 1999, and it wasn't only me, actually, it was the entire field. Started all the talks with this like sentence: humans are expert in face recognition. We simply open our eyes and we can recognize faces. And we have no computational model to model this very humanly master ability to recognize faces. And part of it is because if you look on this like pictures taken in the wild, actually this is my 3 kids, you can see that real life are multidimensional, messy, faces are occluded, lighting, different facial expression, weird setup being on a tree, and so forth. So in order to understand face processing, what we were trained to do is basically try to control stuff and try to understand the underlying neural processes that support this function. And the first thing do it is basically by simplifying and extracting the essence of the process that we think is happening. And for example, over here, you can see the base face illusion, in which you have local features that result in a global perception either of a face or a vase. Or you can take this global organization and scramble it, start to see how, for example, holistic processing is taken apart. And that was indeed my first paper in neuroscience. And the idea there was that by using this highly controlled stimuli, we can uncover the neural code. And this is why we do control experiment in the lab. We have a belief that there is a very smart operation embedded in our neural substrate that help us to do this highly complicated human-like responses, like recognizing faces, or as we'll talk later, also about producing language. And I will give you another example, not from my experiment, but from experiment that I really love in the field that capture this essence. Think about different dimensions for face processing. For example, the height of your feature assembly, or the length of your hair, or hair thickness, eyebrow, inter-eye distance. All these are parameters or features that you can compute and you understand as an experimenter, and you assume that are really important and lie in the basis of the neural code for face processing. Once you define it, you start to think about multidimensional scaling and how these features are embedded in the brain. You run your experiment, you let the monkey in this case watch this highly parametric space that you vary, right? With few parameters that you vary, and start to look for the responses and try to understand the neural code. And this line of thinking is how we train our students to work, right? And there are many, many, many studies throughout the years, and I did some certain PubMed with the word face perception, and you can see there is accumulating of experiments that try to understand the neural code. But I think that even after many, many, many years of research like that, we're still far from having a real computational model for our experiment that can really go to real life and recognize faces. And that really bothered me. It bothered me that all my stimuli are highly controlled, but I wasn't sure how much they explain the variance in the real world. So there is a real tension, right? Because we never see scrambled faces. And even if we do, it's not clear how it helps us to explain how do we process this natural stimuli. So I said, and that was basically the beginning of my journey with natural stimuli, let's move from the lab and use natural stimuli and see how the brain responds, and we will try to replicate what we find in the lab with natural stimuli. And this is where I started to use, that was my first experiment with natural stimuli. I say, let's go wide, let's use the good, the bad, and the ugly. Coming from an experimental control paradigm, we felt that we lost control. We even talked for 2 days whether we should use fixation while people watching the movie or let them freely watch the movie, whether we will have audio as well as the visual images or not. At the end, we say, let's go wild. We let people watch the movie freely. And then we analyze it using intersubject correlation and reverse correlation. And we found, for example, that the fusiform face area at each peak of the responses, this is the activation in the fusiform face area. This is the highest peak. This is the second peak. This is peak number 14. In each peak, when you go back to the movie, you can see close-up of faces. That was like a nice validation that what we found in the lab actually working outside. And naively, I was thinking that my job while using natural stimuli will be to validate findings coming from control experiment and refute others. Because if something is not scaled to real life, it might be not as interesting as people in the lab think it is. But something happened in this journey. So I'm starting very young and very naive, thinking that I'm going to validate the theories. I was sure that theories coming from the lab and are tested in natural stimuli. But something happened. The more I worked with natural stimuli, the more I understood that we have a problem with our theories, way of thinking and way of doing science. And I will give you one example from my own studies. We started to look on how things change over time, because once basically you work in the lab, the stimuli are dynamic and they have dependencies among them. And usually in the lab, we remove time. We work with event-related stimuli, and we don't think how things are related to each other, definitely not in the complexity and scale of natural stimuli in which a movie can be 2 hours long and whatever happening in the last part of the movie related to what's happening at the beginning of the movie. So there's really long-term dependencies. So we started to map this like dependencies of responses to stimulus history, and we find a nice gradient of timescales in which the responses in this particular moment depended on what's happening before. And the higher you went in the hierarchy, the longer this timescale dependencies was uncovered. It was a very nice topography of timescales. And while doing it, I was thinking, dependent of activation to what happened before, this is a type of memory. And I was asking me and people in the lab, and especially Chris Ani, that was like, did his postdoc at my lab at the time, which type of memory are we investigating and how does it fit to the theories? Because we wanted to connect it to the world. We want to connect it to the literature. So it was very important to us to understand how processing timescales dependencies are related to memory and which type of memory. And we failed to do it over and over. It got to the extreme that we could not mention memory in our papers, and we use timescale, processing timescales, because once we will add memory to our papers, the reviewer will say you cannot publish it because we don't understand which type of memory you are studying. And that really confused us. And it took us, I think, like 5-6 years of experiments that are summarized in this TICS paper to understand what was the problem. We like to give boxes and to give labels. We think that part of our processing, and this is embedded in the way we think about control experiment, is to simplify the dimensions. So now basically we can come with different type of memories, right? We have a working memory, we have long-term memory, we have a sensory input, we have auditory storage, we have short-term memories, and so forth. And the reason why you have in this diagram boxes with memory and small arrow with processing, because this is a slide about memory. If I will give a slide about visual processing, I will have a very big arrow for the visual processing and a very small arrow for the working memory, right? Now that we have these like categories, we design a very smart experiment. And I think this is what we train our students, and it's really brilliant experiments. And these experiments are designed to isolate this one parameters we care about while removing all other parameters. And for example, if we take working memory as an example, we design a beautiful task of delay match to sample in which you separate the processing at the beginning and the decision-making at the end from the delay period in which you only have to maintain the color of the sample in your working memory. And now you separated the working memory from all the processes. And now you devote your entire career and the career of many labs to study this working memory in this highly controlled task with many variations, very smart variations. And once you do it, you model your stimuli. You never go back and model the real life. And then you also try to look for these responses in your boxes in the brain. And now you look for the working memory buffer in your brain. But that's all very nice activity. And we can publish papers and get grants and let the wheel move for many years. But does it really match what's happening in real life? And we can start actually not from real life, we can start from the brain. Let me ask you, if this is a processing unit or a memory unit? We're looking on one neuron, the basic current of the brain, and we ask, is it a memory unit or a process unit? Is it the yellow box or the blue arrow? And immediately you can see that the response and the answer, it's both, right? We know that neurons process information and generate action potential, but we also know that they have these like synapses, right? In which the weight contain memory and neural plasticity in memory. So we know that the basic unit of the brain is both processing unit and a memory unit. But that was like removed from our theory, because in our experiments, we wanted to forget that they're coming together. And if you look in real life, you can see that each word in a story basically going to depend on other words. So there's a dependencies between words. Let's take the word story in this sentence. As the story progresses, the pronoun each relate to the word story. And then few seconds after, again, you have the pronoun it that relate again to the word story. There's dependencies. But these dependencies are not only in pronouns, it's all over the place. There is no way to understand what I'm saying now with what understanding of what I was saying in the previous slide. So there's so many dependencies over such long time scales, and we completely forget about it, that this is not a task, this is not a memory task. This is a task about reading and listening and understanding, but memory is built into this task. So in a way, you have these like dependencies all over the place. And in real life, memory and processes going together. We don't have a memory box and a processing box. They're going together. So when we discover this like hierarchy of timescales, what we discover how memory and process interact in each brain area, in each local circuit, and how these dependencies accumulate and getting longer and longer as you move up in the hierarchy. So this is an example of how our theories in the lab do not scale up to the real world. They simply don't. So this is where I was. In a way, we started in 1999, and we are doing this work on timescale of processing and brain-to-brain communication, and they're going to be wonderful talks in this archive from people that continue to do this like wonderful work. And while we're doing it, and I left Vision, and now I'm working about processing timescales and language processing and brain-to-brain communication, I meet a friend, and he's telling me, you know, your statement that you used to say all the time, that humans are expert and we don't have any computational model to model it, is not correct anymore. And remember, it wasn't my sentence, it was the entire field starting each talk with the same sentence. And I say, wow, that's amazing. We as a field, we managed to solve the phrase processing problem. I'm so proud of our field. After so many studies, finally, we have the neural code and we build a model based on our experiment. And you tell me, no, this didn't come from our field. It came from actually external companies like Google and Facebook. They have this model. And I say, how come, and I was a bit annoyed, I have to say, how come external companies managed to solve a problem that the entire field, our field of cognitive neuroscience, cognition, and computational vision worked on, and they managed to solve it? So this is what was one question. The other question was, what do you mean they solved it? How good? It's such a complicated problem. Problem is, our model worked. It's not that they didn't work. We explained 40% of the variants. Recognize faces, the chance level is 0. If your model do 40%, you are very proud, right? So I went to test the model, and I'm going to show you how good is the model. And all of you have your model on your phone, right? So this is taken from my phone. This is Google Image. You all have this like app. And basically this model can take a face and classify it, right? And basically this model wasn't trained on the images on my phone, but it can take all my images on the phone and cluster them to identities. And it tells me, this is the identities that I see on your phone. And then you go and give the label. Okay, so the label is coming from me, the recognition is coming from Google. Okay, so that's like amazing. It even recognizes people that I don't know of that are on my phone. Let me give you an example over here. You can see this guy over here. I have no clue who he is, okay? And now let's go to one guy. This is like my older son, Jonathan. Let's go to its folder and let's look how good is the recognition. So first, I want to introduce you. This is Jonathan. Now he's 13. That was taken a year ago, so over 12. And you can see it's in real life context. There is no experiment over here. Google recognizes Jonathan. Now you can see that he recognizes Jonathan in 98% of the time in really difficult and different contexts. For example, this is here Jonathan on the corner, you can see, right? This is Jonathan now occluded with different lighting and different viewpoint. This is again, as you see, this is Jonathan with his brothers on the tree. Very different facial expression, lighting, and context. This is different age, definitely non-typical setup. He's still not confused by it. This is again in Halloween, a very different context. Again, not confused by it. This is Jonathan as a baby, 2.5 years old, and it's still not that it's Jonathan. And I'm thinking, this is exactly what we want as cognitive neuroscientists. This is the models that we want that can take a cognitive function like face recognition and recognize and operate like human in the real world. This is exactly what we strive in the field. So after being annoyed that out of the field technology gave us a cognitive solution, I went to do a sabbatical in Google, and I was saying, okay, let's try to understand these models. Let's try to understand how they're working, because maybe there is a solution. Maybe now we have a cognitive model to model natural stimuli. So I'm going to give you a very brief, superficial explanation of how it's working. I can give actually an entire course on it, and I'm not going to do it. So people that really understand can skip immediately. People that not can stay. It's going to be 2 slides. We're going to be highly superficial. We're going to remove all the technical information, okay? So basically, the way it's working, we really understand the pixel. So basically, I can take an image and I can give you the values of the pixel. Let's say I have 4,000 pixels in this image. I can give you 4,000 values. You multiply by by color, so you can multiply by 3 if you want, and then you have more dimension. So this is the input, easy. I also understand the ending. This is Harrison 4, right? So I know that I want this label, this image, to give me this label Harrison 4. You transfer this activation from the input layer, the pixel layer, to nonlinear transformation. Over here, it's not convolutional neural network to make it simple. I did it like fully connected, only to simplify things, okay? Basically, you take the activation over here and you multiply it. Let's see if I can. And you can multiply the activation over here with this like weight, add some nonlinearity that is really important, and get another activation, and then you can multiply it with this weight and get activation. And this multiplication of matrices over time give you activation over here. Okay, you throw random weights, you let it activate, and then this is neuron number 5. This is the neuron that got the highest activity randomly. And of course, it's not going to be Harrison 4. What are the chances? If you have many examples and many labels, the chance is 0. But you can calculate the error. And by calculating the error now, you can backprop the networks, change all the weight, and make it that next time they're going to see this image, they're going to say it correctly. And then you do this optimization over and over for many images. The number of examples is in this particular networks is start to be non-human, right? Basically, they use 8 million identities and 200 million images. And after you do it for many times, you get a network that can go to my phone and recognize all of my friends and family. And in a way, they can recognize most of the people on Earth, basically. And if they have like a problem with race, they can add example from different races and solve the race effect and so forth. So now that we have this FaceNet model, we can look inside and ask, how does it recognize faces? So in a way, during my sabbatical, I met the team, the head of the team that work of Google Photos. We have 600 engineers behind him. And I told him, now that we have this model, can you tell me what are the features? Can you look inside and tell me what are the features that support face recognition? Because your network learned it. Now it's no. It's so that you didn't program it. You didn't even tell the network that this pixel have a nose or eye or a face. You gave this pixel and said Harrison 4. So you never explained the network what faces are, but I assume that they learn and now they know. And basically, when you open this black box, and actually it's not a black box because we built it, it's a transparent box. We can look inside and see its neuron, its weight over time. We know the learning rules, we know the computational that's going on, we know the objective function that we use to optimize, we know everything, right? When you look at it, you find that 140 million parameters in this particular network. It's a huge model. Some people won't call it a model because for us, model in cognitive neuroscience is like 5 parameters that we understand, like the features of faces that I saw at the beginning, not 140 million parameters. And when you ask how these features that we use in our experiment embedded in these neural networks, no one knows because no one programmed it, right? It didn't learn our rules. Google didn't do experiments and didn't embed knowledge from our experiment into their network. They simply let it learn from example in this like very simple-minded optimization process that we described. So it's not even clear that all our work helped this model. Now, before we will ask, okay, it's nice that we have this technology, but this technology has nothing to do with our brain because the brain is doing it in another way. Before we go to this, let's look on another model. And remember, the question that I'm going to ask you later, whether there is something in these networks that is really some principles that are used by the brain, and if they're used by the brain, maybe all this like control experiment lead us in the wrong direction. So that's what we're going to test. But first, let's look on another example. Let's look on language. And I'm doing language from two reasons. First, because we study language in the lab. So I will have empirical finding. I don't want to become a vision scientist again. I want to continue on the line of research we are doing. And also because this is like the pinnacle of human behavior. This is the basis of cognition, of human cognition. And it was the basis of the cognitive revolution. And it's the best example that we have for the way we are thinking about cognition. So let's do language. Similar to vision, right? Language is complicated, multidimensional. As a scientist, basically we try to simplify it. So we look on language and we look for the structures, the language. And we found that there are like noun, verbs, adjective, suffix, prefix, and then also there are like grammatical rules. And this is what we're trying to define as psycholinguistics. To define this like very simple, compact rule. And we assume that these compact rules are implemented in the neural code. And because it's such a complicated question language, linguistics even try to constrain it. So for example, many linguists will say we study syntax. We don't study semantic. We don't study pragmatic. Or if you study pragmatic, you don't study syntax. And again, you have this like subdivision in the field, and we look for experiments that are going to tackle one dimension of syntax or one dimension of semantic while removing everything else. And the problem is that even after 60 to 80 years of this particular investigation, again, we cannot build computational model using these linguistic parameters and rules that work in the real world. We cannot build this model. And one of the reasons that we cannot build the model is that for each rule that you come with, you will have too many exceptions and too many irregularities. And sometimes we have as many exceptions to a rule as examples to the rule. So it's very given all these like subtleties, it's very difficult. Immediately you can see it's very difficult to build a computer program that can do it. And again, it's not that the program failed to do it completely. They will manage to do it in 50, 60% of the time, which is really impressive, right? It's similar to the face recognition before FaceNet. It's not that we failed, we simply got to a point that it worked halfway, but never in real life, never to the full extent, never to the complexity that we wanted to get. Let me give you a very simple example. Very basic, right? How do you make noun plural? You add the S, right? That's like a rule. But then immediately you can see that this rule captures only part of the example. So then basically you say, this rule has variation. Sometimes you have to add ES. Sometimes you have to drop the Y and add IES. And sometimes you have to drop the F and add VES in order to get a plural. And sometimes it's simply irregular memorize. We cannot give you any rule. This is very different plural and simply learn the exception. And there are so many exceptions to each rule that we never manage basically to have a working system. And suddenly again, as happened in vision, but this happened only 2 years ago, so it's very recent progress in machine learning. Suddenly, new language model, deep language model came to the table, and I'm going to present to you now with GPT-2 and explain a bit. And this model is even bigger than the vision model. You have 1.5 billion parameters. So to understand it, we need to go again, very superficial. If you know it, you can move the slide. If you don't, stay for 2 slides. You will get a bit of understanding, but not a deep understanding, okay? How does it work? You take each word and you give it a random number, set of numbers. Let's say 100 numbers, okay? And you call it an embedding, and you start from random as you start with the face net with random weights. So now each word now is a vector or embedding of 100 numbers. And then you give it to a neural network, and you give it a sentence, and you mask the center of the sentence, okay? And then you ask the word, and basically, and then you take this vector, right? And now you can turn it into numbers and plug it as you did with the pixel to the input layer. Very easy, you understand the input layer. And you also understand what you want at the end. At the end, you want this network to say time. So you want it to spit a vector of 100 numbers over here that will be the closer to the vector of the word time. And because you start with random, right? You do this multiplication, you will get garbage, right? So you have a prediction of a word, but you know the actual word that was masked. You can calculate the error, you can propagate it to improve the prediction. And after you do it over and over and you fit millions of text from the internet, your vectors start to adjust and capture some structures in the language that you don't understand anymore. And if you look at it, you can see actually these vectors allow you now to do math and computation with words. And it looks like magic. So first, remember, embedding is going to be the new representation in psychology. It's really going to change the field. If you do not know what embedding is, you have to learn, because that will give you a new entry of what is representation in the brain. And I will give an example of computation. If you take the vector king and subtract from the vector of man and add the vector of woman, you get queen. In natural language, you can think about it. What is the relationship between a king to a man is like a woman to a queen. You can do it also with Rome to Italy, is like France to Paris. You can even capture grammatical regularities. Walk to walk is like play to played. So it really also captures over here the past tense. So it's not only semantic embedding, although it's called semantic embedding, it also captures some syntactic embeddings. And then you can project it basically on different dimensions. For example, over you project it to the dimension of masculinity, female versus man. So basically you find this dimension and project the 100 dimension to this one dimension. And now you can see which occupations are more feminine or more masculine in our society. So what are the biases that we have in society and so forth. You see, it starts to be an interesting semantic model, right, of words. But this is not enough, because if you have a cloud of words, and I'm taking one word in this cloud, like the word cold, it will give you one vector of 100 numbers for the word cold. But I know that the word cold changes based on the context, changes by the way I'm using it. For example, it is freezing cold today. In another sentence, you are a cold person. Or cold symptoms include a runny nose, blah, blah, blah. Each one of them, the word cold, have slightly different meaning, right? One is in the sense of temperature, one in the sense of symptoms, and the other in the sense of personality. And you have also to pay attention that the context is bigger than a sentence. If I'm telling you the sentence, you are cold as ice, you cannot know whether I mean it in the temperature, you are sick, or you are a very cold person. You don't know because you have to get more words. Context is longer than a sentence. That's going back to our temporal dependencies over time. So modern language models can even deal with this context problem. And the way now modern technology, they use transformers. In a way, the task of this model is to predict the next word. Basically, you hear a sentence, a word, you predict the next word, you feed it in, you predict the next word, and so forth. Inside of it, there is an encoder and decoder and a context and attentional component. We don't need to go how it's working, but it still is like matrix multiplication, so it's very similar principles. And these models, basically what it basically is doing is what we call self-supervision. And human can use it as well. That's the power of this model. Think I have the sentence, our story begins deep in there, and now I need to guess the next word. And then I'm listening, so I'm guessing. And after I'm guessing, I'm also listening to what came. And I know reinforcement, rainforest in this case. And you can use it to reinforce the network, right? So basically, you feed this context, and GPT-2 try to predict, and then you come with contextual embedding that try to predict. Based on this contextual embedding, you give probabilities for all the words in your lexicon. So you can see likely our story begins deep in the ocean. Probably that's the most likely word. Maybe deep in the jungle, right? Deep in the rainforest can be the third, and so forth. And after you have all these probabilities before word onset, you're listening to the word, and you see it was a rainforest. So now you can calculate the surprise level, and you can use it to backprop and adjust your network and do it over and over and over. And the model can do it, and also it's available to humans if they have this mechanism built in. And we still don't know, and I will talk about it in the third part of the talk. To give you a sense how good these models are, let me give you an example. So we can use this model and you can play it at all. You can click talk with transformer and play with it, do the same exercise. Basically, you know, I went to today article, July 29. You can see this is today article. The model wasn't trained about it, and I'm not sure what will happen with this experiment. I took the first 2 sentences of this article. I'm going to plug this article, these 2 sentences in the model. You can see over here that we plugged it over here. So you can see this like 2 sentences. We can read it together. Heat waves, flood, wildfires. It's been a destructive summer so far. In forecast for drought, fires, and hurricanes are looking downright bleak. We know that climate change is to blame, but how exactly is global warming driving dangerous weather? That's the input that came from the article. Now I'm asking this language model, now try to predict the next word, plug it in, and predict the next word. So now generate new text. And now it's going to write. So basically now it's generating a new text. I have no clue what it's going to generate. Okay, it generates in real time. So we do this experiment together. And what you will see, basically, you will see that it managed to generate structural sentences that have the right syntax, the right semantic, and the right pragmatic. And this is not a thinking model. No one is thinking over it. So is missing a component. I don't think this is a model for thinking. This is a model for language production, right? But you can see that in no semantic, pragmatic, and syntax. So let's read it. When it comes to drought, we know that hotter weather leads to drier weather. And while it's true that in some places this is a problem, namely the eastern half of the US, actually it's a problem in the south, actually in the west. So it doesn't know what it's talking about, but it's unconvincing, right? And you can see that he's talking on the right topic and using pragmatic sign like this, like brackets. And if I will use an article from scientific paper, it will try to sound like a scientist. Okay, so you learn a lot about language. It's a good model for language. Okay, it's not a model for thinking, but it's a good model for language without knowing that there is a noun or a verb or a rule. And basically, this is confusing because once you open it again, it's way bigger than the ImageNet, 1.5 billion parameters. And then in the newer model, 150 billion parameters. These models are huge, right? Although they are transparent and we build them and know exactly how to train them and how they are built, it's very difficult to find all these like rules that we were thinking are implemented in the neural code. Where are they? So now let's stop for a second and ask, how to implement a rule in a neural network? Can you implement a rule? Is it a rule-based system? Because as we saw, you multiply these matrices and then optimize them blindly. It's not even clear that it's a rule-based, and it's not really clear that they are learning rules. So let's stop for a second and ask, are they learning rules? So we did a simple experiment. Say, let's take the simplest rule ever, a parabola, y equal x squared, okay? And try to train a network to learn this rule from examples. You want a network that you give it x, and the output is x squared. Very simple rule, right? Very simple transformation. And to train it, it's easy to generate example. So we generated an example drawn with parabola with noise, and we gave it 3,000 training points. And this network was a small network, fully connected with 1,200 neurons, but because it's fully connected, it's over-parameterized. It has 27,000 parameters. So in a way, you have more parameters in the network than the examples. And this is something that is not allowed in modeling, right? Because it's like called overfitting. When you have more parameters in your model than the parameters in your example, you're afraid of overfitting, right? There would be like no generalization. And also you can ask, why do you need 27,000 parameters to implement this like very simple one parameter formula? Why do you need it? It sounds overkill. This is when you come from the simple rule, but when you come to the brain, you can say 24/7,000. But you know, in small fraction of a millimeter, I have more weights, synaptical weights than this. So let's do the brain. It's a tiny, ridiculous model relative to our problem. It's look over parameterized, right? So we train this network. Very easy to train this network, right? That's a simple problem. And what happened? What happened was revealing. So this is our training set. Now in red, going to be new example that we're going to test the model on. And of course, we can generate infinite new examples, right? And when we generate that example, new data points, red, right? That were sampled from within the same distribution of training set, the model did really well. It looked like he learned the parabola. He learned the rule. And remember, I can generate infinite new example in this range. But when I generate new example out of sample, there was like no generalization to out of sample, no generalization. So it's looked at instead of learning and approximate the function, it did something else. It approximated the function, but it approximated the function within the range of example. And this is usually what we call interpolation. So it's looked like you have two types of generalization, and both of them are generalization and not overfit, because you generalize to new examples. One is generalization within the training zone or the interpolation zone, and one is outside of the statistics of the stimuli, and that's called the extrapolation zone. So this network learned to generalize, but in a very constrained sense. And we as a scientists despise this solution. We think that interpolation-based inference is not a real inference because you didn't learn the rule. You didn't learn the governing factor that generate this data, right? And in classical textbook, we say, if you use linear fit to a parabola, you're underfit, right? If you increase the parameter of your model, right, now you can have this like nonlinearity and fit it, right? But if you have more parameters, you can overfit and you have explosive fit that you basically go to all the points, but you don't really take the structures of the data. So over you will have a very weak generalization. But even if you regularize and do a very tight fit and you are not exploding, as happening in neural networks, we still say that your model didn't learn anything about the underlying structures. You took the shape of the data, but you didn't learn anything out of it. So if this is what neural networks are doing, as a scientist, we think this is not the brain is working. This is not relevant. But we see that neural networks actually are a very powerful solution. So why is it? And it took us a while to get it essentially clicked. This is a brilliant solution. This is really a brilliant solution. So the thing that we despise as scientists is very powerful. And why is it? It's powerful because of the following reason. This approximation of function within the training set allows you to approximate any function that you want in the world without understanding the problem or the solution. Artificial neural networks are not scientists. They don't try to understand. They try to fit to the data and give you the solution that allow you to act appropriately. And we're going to talk about it in a second. But if we're going to talk about it, think for a second. You never saw in the world whether your rule that was working within your example is going to also continue to function in another set, in another context, right? Over here, the parabola went forever, right? But think about a world that have a very different structures. Once you go out of this thing, the rule changed, and suddenly it's do like a random walk and generate this particular shape. So now the distribution of your blue point in this regime is a completely different rule. It's like the language example. You're all working over here, but it doesn't work in another context. Immediately you can see that this model doesn't care. It will learn it, right? The trick is now, how do you want it to learn? Expand your sampling. If you're going now to sample this new blue dot, the model learn it. This model can approximate any function that you want, as complicated as you want, as long as you're sampling all the parameter space. That's all you need. And then you will have a working model that can function in the real world without understanding the underlying rules. So it's not a rule-based model, but it's a very powerful way to learn. So if we go back to language, you can see immediately why it's working, right? Because if you have this machine that can approximate any function that you want in any context, you can see it's very easy. If you're sampling this example, I learn this rules. If you sample a different example, you learn the additional rule. And if you sample the entire space, it can work with regular nouns, with the IES, the SES, and so forth. In context, you learn, for this particular example, I will memorize this solution and generate this prediction. So as long as you have convention and regularities in your data, and it's not random, the model can learn any function. Doesn't matter how complicated it is. And immediately you can see this is a genius solution. And when we saw it, we say, wait, this solution reminds me something. And now we go into the second part of the talk, and immediately you can see it's going to be a longer than intended talk, because with already like 1 hour of talk. I hope that you're watching it in double speed, and basically now you're only 30 minutes in. If not, switch to double speed. I will try to make the other 2 parts shorter. But immediately it reminded us of evolution, right? It really reminded us of evolution. Think about what is connected between my daughter, a tree, a fly, and a fish. And if you think about evolution, you realize they are all relatives. They all have origin ancestor that started to divide over and over till they were developed. So if you look on the DNA of yourself and the tree, you will see that you have related DNA because you have related ancestors. And this is the most beautiful figure in science, right? You can see that basically this is the point of origin, 350 million years ago. And you can see how these like 2 cells start to split and generating the tree of life. This is where basically the eye was invented, and you have this like explosion of species. This is the Cambria explosion period. This is extinct species over here. And when you get over here to the outer layer, this is today. And you can see that all the species, the living species on Earth, from bacteria to fungi, to fish, to shark, to amphibian, to birds, to mammals, they are all connected. And you can see that basically this is human over here. Recently, if you zoom in, you can see this is the split between human and monkeys, and it's a very recent split. So if people ask you why you're excited about evolution, always remember, because me and the tree are relatives. And if you think about evolution, it's like an amazing thing, because basically we have a very simple set of rules that allow us to develop. And you know that evolution is not a theory that's going to predict how we're going to evolve in 1,000 years. This is not a theory about prediction. This is theory about optimization and fit to the environment. And you know basically that deep creatures in the sea, a very different fit than than animals in the desert or animals in the jungle, right? And you know that the sea level going to rise now in 1 degree temperature. And experts say 80% of the species in the sea going to die. This is like crazy overfit. 1 degree and 80% of the species are going to die. But you also know that it's like 20% going to evolve and new species are going to emerge, because we always fit to the environment. This is evolution. That's what's wonderful about evolution. So if you are not extinct, you will evolve. And to understand evolution, you need to understand 4 basic things. And I'm not going to give you a lecture about evolution, but I will remind you very, very briefly about evolution. It's overproduction with variations, right? You have to go, it's like big data, you have to go to this like trillions of iterations from this like 2 cells that start to emerge in order to get to humans. It's like trillion and trillion and trillion of iteration in the tree of life till you fit to the solution, right? You have to have a mechanism that's going to save your past and allow change. And this is exactly what you have with DNA. They preserve the information that comes from our ancestors. This is why you can see the tree in my DNA. Part of the tree, the long, long story that the moment we were connected, but it also allows new changes for my kids that are going to be different than me. You have to have this like blind optimization process, like natural selection, that tell you this change is good, this change is not good. And it has to take time because no one is designing it. You have to iterate this like very simple thing over and over and to optimize the fit till you get the tree of life, right? So this is evolution. Now let's look on the similarities between evolution and the brain and artificial neural networks as well. You have to remember that behavior have a purpose. If these mice want cats, if the cat not going to catch the mice, the cat going to starve. If the cat going to chase and catch the mice going to die. There is a lot of pressure for them. There is a behavior, there is a purpose for it. And then there is a closed loop. The cat learns to walk and to chase and to eat. And the mice also learn to run and hide and protect itself. And in this like optimization, it learns stuff. So there is a purpose to behavior, right? This is like the objective. And there is an objective for each behavior. So you learn to act. That's what the brain is doing, is generating action. It doesn't need to understand, but you need to act, okay? Now, neural networks, artificial neural networks are also, they are not models that try to understand anything. The models that try to act. You have neural networks that learn the similar technique, but now to take, there is a camera and robotic arms, and this camera and robotic arms are connected, and you learn to see and act and pick up objects with very different physics and velocity and materials and throw it to different boxes. This is action. Driving is another example of action, right? And neural networks can learn how to drive. Neural networks can learn how to play a game. Neural networks can learn how to speak, as we saw with GPT-2, or recognize faces, as we saw with FaceNet. These are networks that do not try to understand. They try to act, and the way we evaluate them is how good is their action. If a network not going to come from A to B, it doesn't know how to drive. This is it. If you have an accident, it's a lousy network. Go to court. If you manage to drive from A to B, this is the best, amazing network ever, right? So we develop them and optimize them by the way they are acting, not how they understand the problem. They are not scientists, right? And also not all these like cognitive examples, it's the same principle. So now you think maybe there is a cognitive model, because it's very difficult to imagine that we have another generic solution that can work across so many different domains of cognitive problems. That's like evolution again. And again, if you understand that this network acts and not understand, you immediately understand that this network is also the brain. It's not a scientist. The rule of the game is not whether I understood how you compute faces, or what is a grammatical rule. I simply, because I know how to use language, I understand, because I know how to act. And now we can go even deeper to the similarities between them. Similar to overproduction, to train this network, you need big data. So again, you need a lot of exposure. You need to sample the entire parameter space. So big data is everything over here. In science, we think about how we isolate things in the lab, and then we ask how it will generate to a different context. So our problem in science is extrapolation. You learn something over here, and now you want to extrapolate by knowing the rule to different contexts. And people even think about language in the sense of extrapolation. So not only scientists, but linguists can tell you basically, right? They will tell you the input is very impoverished. You know, you talk with your kid, random list of sentences. The brain computational resources are very scarce, although we saw that the brain is overparameterized. For them, it's very scarce. And this like silo supervision, you give you some examples, you will never learn the rules. So you need to be born with universal grammar, right? In the new way of thinking, you move to big data. You're sampling the entire parameter space. We have so many examples of language that GPT-2 saw, so many examples of faces that you saw the entire space. So now your input is not improvised. Your computational resources are not scarce. These are huge models, small relative to the brain, but relative to us are big models. And shallow supervision is sufficient. This will give you more than machine learning, right? And of course, you will never be able to generalize to things you never saw. If you live only in the Western world, you will have a race effect for this model. They don't know how to recognize faces in East Asia unless they were trained on examples from that, similar to humans. Now you also need neural plasticity. It's very similar to DNA neurons. They save the past, but also allow you to change the weights and learn. So there's learning and memorization, right? So neurons carry the past, and at the same time, they can allow you plasticity. And it makes learning a memory-dependent optimization. So again, it's not a rule-based understanding, it's memory-based learning. Similar to natural selection, this like objective function optimization, it's a very blind, very stupid learning rule that you use. Slightly worse, slightly better till you learn. Nothing sophisticated. It's very similar to evolution. And slightly like evolution, it takes a lot of time. You need to iterate it many times. And you cramp it over space so you can learn it in your lifetime. So it's like space and time. You cramp this 150 million parameters in your brain, and then you optimize it. So go back to our simple rule. It's true that the network never learned this simple rule. But because you fit to your data, you can see that you have a parabola in your network. So now if you look into these networks and look for a parabola, you will find a parabola. You can extract it from the activity of these like neural networks, because what you feed in is what you get out. And this is what misled us for many, many years. Because for many years, we do this experiment with very explicit structure. And then we see the structures emerge in our brain because the brain fit to our experiment, because it fit to everything you give it. And they didn't think, oh, I found a neural rule. The neural networks really implemented the parabola, but it didn't. It simply did this like a fitting and optimization. So it's the same if you open GPT-2 neural networks and you look for these grammatical rules. There's beautiful work coming from Chris Manning lab currently, that they really find these like syntactical trees and attention aids that are sensitive to grammatical parameters. So it looks like the network learned grammar, but it didn't. It's not a rule-based system. It always multiplies the same matrices after optimization to generate an action. But it took the data of the structure, so of course you will find it inside. But that doesn't mean that this network imply and use grammatical rules. It's really a mistake that confused good people in machine learning that simply came from physics and think in this like rule-based thinking. But that's not the way this network is working. So go to the third part. This is the last part, and I promised that I'm going to do a blitz of 10 minutes, so we'll be only 1 hour and 30 minutes talk. Too long. I really apologize for it, guys. And maybe I'm talking to the void because I'm talking in my office. Maybe no one is listening and it's fine. I can talk forever. And if you will go, I will never know and I will never be offended. Last part, you can do it also tomorrow after the break, or go take a coffee and come back. Last part. I explained to you superficially how neural network, how GPT-2 is learning language. It was a very impressive model. And remember, there are like 3 components to it, right? Let's remind, there is this, you feed the context, it goes to the network, generate this contextual embedding that really captures a lot of the structures of the language in context. From this contextual embedding, you can derive the probability of each word in the lexicon. You predict ocean at the top, and you give priorities to all other words. Then you're listening to the incoming word. So this is like self-supervised learning. You see reinforced, and now you need to basically update your weights, right? So now we took the same story and we gave it to GPT-2 and to the brain. We recorded null activity, and we wanted to check the following. In the first part, we want to see, are humans really good in predicting words in natural context? How good are you now to predict what I'm going to say next? Then we ask, can we read from your brain before the word is pronounced what you predict, what's going to come? Are you really do this prediction now when you're listening to me? After the word was saying, can we detect the error signal? How surprised you are? Because this is the other component for GPT-2. And that's going to be in the second part. And in the third, okay, whether we can see this error signal after word onset. And then do you represent word using embedding space, contextual embedding space, similar to GPT-2. So we really take the main principal component of the model and we ask, can the brain also use these tricks? Or is it only like OpenAI in Google and Facebook tricks? Or this is also tricks that the brain can use because they are very similar to evolution and are very powerful. So this is what we ask in this study. So first, how good are you in predicting words? Basically, we took an NPR podcast, 30 minutes NPR podcast. It's a very fun podcast. A photographer put a camera in the jungle. Monkeys came, learned how to press the button, and took selfies. Beautiful selfies. This is one of the selfies. Then people argue, who have the rights to this photo? Is it the photographer copyright, or it's the right of the monkey that took the picture? It went to court. It's a very funny podcast. You should listen to it. We let people listen to it. But in this behavioral experiment on MTurk, there's no brain over here yet. We simply did like GPT-2. We stop the story, ask you to predict the next word. You predicted the next word, and then you saw the answer, and then you predicted the next word. And then you saw the word, and you predicted the following word. So basically, you go word by word by word, and you generate prediction. A bit tedious, but now we know how good can you predict word. And we have prediction score. We have like a 50 subject over here, so we have 50 prediction for each of the 5,000 words. This is an example of a word that everyone predict. We have 100% correct. This is an example that we have 70% correct. This is an example that no one can predict. So some word everyone predicts, some word no one can predict. We can do the same trick with GPT-2, and now we can get the prediction of GPT-2. Sometimes it's confidence 100%, sometimes you have zero confidence. Sometimes you succeed, sometimes you fail. Okay. Basically, when we compare GPT-2 prediction to human prediction, we got very strong correlation of about like 0.8. So the prediction are highly correlated, and also the mistakes. The agreement between GPT-2 and the human were like 50% of the world where they got the exact same prediction, whether they were right or wrong. It's very strong correlation between the two. So now that you know that you can say it can go both ways. GPT is really good in prediction, or human are really good in prediction. I don't know. Both of them are really good, and both of them are very similar. That's what we learn over here. Now we are going to the brain, and you can ask, can we see this under the hood? Next word prediction before word onset, and prediction error after word onset. So we let epileptic patients with intracranial recording implemented within the brain to listen to this like 30 minutes podcast. Over here, they don't need to predict anything. It's a continuous, regular playing of the podcast. They simply need to enjoy the story and answer some questions at the end. No prediction task. Real life. We believe in real life, remember, guys, right? Now we have the neural responses, we have the audio envelope align, and the transcript each word, so we know each word when it was saying. And we can do encoding model in which we add basically embedding. We can have a random numbers, or we can have a static embedding, or GPT-2 embedding, and do this encoding based, and do this like general encoding model that you're all familiar with. I don't need to explain. If not, go to the paper and you can have details about the model. Basically, what you can see first that if we use language models, this is a static embedding, we get a very nice encoding. It's way better than random embedding. This is in the blue. And you can see we get embedding encoding in the right language areas, in STG, Broca's area, inferior frontal gyros, and high order language areas in what people call vernicals, and other people that are really care about linguistics will tell you that it's way more complicated and divided to different areas, but really in language areas and also motor language areas. So we get the language network we expect with this method. Importantly, you can see that our encoding is work even before word onset, right? So we can see that we can really predict the neural responses for words before they are saying. Is it an evidence that there is a prediction going on before the word onset? Because no one managed so far to read what people predict before word onset. So we look deeply into it. And we say, if this is prediction, first, let's look for word that you managed to predict, high close probability, and word that you failed to predict, right? And when divided it and ran the encoding model, we saw that indeed, for words that you can predict, you have way better encoding before than word that you failed to predict and they start after onset. And that was true across many, many electrodes. Very strong prediction signal. And you can see sometimes it can go even like 1 second before. So it's very strong signal. Next we ask, let's go even deeper. Sometimes you expect a word, but you have a false prediction. What happens if I'm modeling it based on what you expect relative to what you listen, right? So let's say you predict a friend, but the coming word is loyal. It's not your friend, okay? This is false prediction. Will I be able to predict and read the word friend and not loyal from your brain before word onset? Because this is what you predicted, right? And remember, GPT-2 gives you the exact prediction. Over here, you know that GPT-2, and also humans, because humans are very similar to GPT-2, predict ocean, but they're going to listen to rainforest. So when we model using the top 1 prediction relative to what you listen, so we took all the cases that you got it wrong, this is when we're modeling your expectation. You can see this is the word you expected, right? And you can see very nice prediction that peaked before word onset, right? And this is when we use for the exact same time the word you actually heard, and then you can see it peaked after, because this is when what you heard. So it's beautiful example how we have strong evidence that in natural stimuli, when you listen to podcasts without need to predict anything, your brain for each word is predicting. That's very similar to this like language model, very similar. And now we can ask, that was before word onset. What's happening after? Do you compute the surprise level? Because the surprise level is what you use in order to optimize the network for learning. Right? This is model that learn, and you can learn language that way if you will have this like error signal as well, how much you are surprised by the outcome. And indeed, we have evidence that for the incorrect prediction, we see increase in activity level 400 milliseconds after. So in a way, it's very similar to the N400. People saw it before, and we can also decode surprise in the world, so we can also do the encoding. I don't want to show these results go to the paper because we are running out of time. So we have also this error signal. And finally, we can ask, do we use this contextual embedding? It's like vector that represent all the dimensions of language, including grammar, semantic, and pragmatic, as we saw before. So now we're opening the model. We're opening under the hood. We take the embedding from the model and we use it to model the neural responses, right? So now we plug to the encoding the embedding that's coming from GPT-2. And immediately you can see that it gives us the best fit to the neural data, meaning that this neural data is really nicely aligned with the embedding space coming from GPT-2, and it's better than the embedding coming from static embedding, and it's way better than the embedding coming from arbitrary embedding. So it looks like it's really aligned with the neural responses, and it's not only aligned in space. If you do it per electrode, you can see that your fit is way better for the contextual embedding relative to the static embedding. And in the paper, we have even more evidence. It's getting deeper and deeper, and I can tell you which aspect of this embedding drive each aspect of the neural responses. We can also do not only encoding, we can do decoding and predict based on the neural responses what the word you are thinking about. So it's becoming really wild, but I will stop over it. And I want to wrap up. What we learned, in which you can see, once you start working with natural stimuli, everything changed. We were naive to think that our task as people that work natural stimuli is to validate theories coming from the lab. I think the theories in the lab have very strong assumptions. We don't think about these assumptions, but they have assumptions about the neural code. And the assumption that you implement a very clear rule that allows you to extrapolate. But maybe our brain is doing something very different, and the brain is learning to act, and it's not about understanding, it's about acting and doing. And now we have also computational models to model the neural responses to natural stimuli. So if we have a linguistic in the room, I'm not sure whether linguistic will stay till the end of the talk, but if we have a linguistic in the room and he's really furious about us proposing that the brain implement this like deep neural networks instead of the linguistic rules, I urge him to come to us, take our data, fit it with the model, traditional model of linguistic rules, and we do model comparison, and we see whether which model explains more from the variance, because this is an empirical question, not a philosophical question, right? You need to take the data and do model comparison. And if your model is not allow you to model natural stimuli, it's a problem of your model, because the brain is modeling natural stimuli all the time. Now, two additional components. People say 5 parameters model is way better than 1 billion parameters model. So your model is more parsimonious than us. This is not correct. Parsimonious depend on the dimension. If we will take evolution and we'll say, right, if we ask whether GPT-2 is simpler or more parsimonious than the rule-based syntactical rule, it's not a well-defined question, okay? If someone will tell you evolution take 250 million years, but I can create it in 6 days, my model is simpler than you, you say, no, I think that actually evolution is more simple, because if you have God, it's a very complicated model, because you need to know and understand all the interaction at once. You cannot optimize to the problem without understanding it. The same over here. I think that neural networks is a very simpler solution. It's a solution actually that we despise, but it's a very powerful solution. Saying that, the current version of neural networks have many, many problems for cognition. The data is too big, and we don't learn from 8 million faces or from reading text for 120 years, right? So the data that is fed is too big. Also unnatural, we don't learn from text, we learn from people speaking and doing. When I'm telling you, this is a cup with water, you want to see? Now you understand what is water. If you only read this sentence, you will never know what is water and what is drinking. So we need to add bodies. We need to have better context. These models can deal with it, but we need to make them more realistic. We need to train them on more realistic data to see what is missing. Another thing, it doesn't explain everything about humans, okay? Newton was a person, right? Scientists are humans, but they do amazing stuff with the brain. They can really understand the underlying rules. If you understand Newton's law, you can go to the moon and you know how objects going to move. That's like an amazing extrapolation. And it's very interpretable rule, right? So we can understand the nature of language. We can understand the nature of physics. This is what scientists do. Again, it's not the brain, but we can use the brain to do science. So the brain have components that are utterly missing in deep neural networks, and we need to add them to the model. You can think about the deep neural networks as a model for system one, all the things that are fast, unconscious, automatic, error-prone. And system two, when it's slow, conscious, effortful, we need to develop. And it's still not clear how far we can push these models, because they do more and more things, but you don't want to learn calculus from examples, okay? You can learn the multiplication table from examples, but if you really want to understand calculus, learn the rule, okay? Don't use examples, okay? Don't optimize to examples to learn calculus. So there are more than deep neural networks. That's not the end. I don't say that we have a solution for everything. I say this is the foundation, and the foundation are different. And now we need to expand how from this foundation, the rest is emerging, okay? So evolution is part of it, but then we have additional component. It's not only optimizing the simple objective function, suddenly there is more complexity that is merged. And this is why it's exciting. And this is why we're going to be busy with natural stimuli and the brain and these models for many years, because there are things missing in our theory, things missing in our model to explain real-life cognition in the real world. And this is the journey that we're all taking. But what I promise you, that if you work with natural stimuli, we are on the brink of scientific revolution, because the field is going to change. And if you agree with me, you can see why. And if you don't agree, I will love to hear. And if you don't agree, I can also say I get you. Sometimes I really hope that I'm wrong, because there is something so beautiful in the simple interpretable model that we like in psychology. There is something so beautiful in control experiment that my heart is lying with this forever, because I was also trained like that. And I love the simplicity, and I love the interpretability, and I don't like the overfit. But once you understand, like you understand evolution, how beautiful is this solution, how smart it is to approximate any function that you want, as complex as you want, as long as you know how to act within your boundaries, the brain has to use it. And there's a lot more that I can say, but I'm going to stop. Go to it. See you in a month, maybe, maybe not forever, maybe no one listened ever. It was fun. And thank you for listening if you stay so far. This is it.